The arrow missed Moreo's ear by 2 inches. She felt the wind of it before she heard the sound, a sharp whistle cutting through rain and darkness, and then the shaft buried itself into the tree behind her head with a sound like a door slamming shut on everything she had ever known. She did not scream. She could not. Her voice had left her body entirely. All she could do was hold tighter to the man in her arms. This stranger, this bleeding, barely conscious man in soaked blue royal hanbok, and stare at the circle of soldiers closing around them through the trees with torches and drawn bows and expressions that said they had done this before and felt nothing about it. She had woken up this morning in Seoul. She had eaten jollof rice from last night's pot and gone to work at Seoul National General Hospital and saved a man from internal bleeding in Bay 4 and filled out paperwork until her eyes burned. She had been a nurse. A normal nurse living a normal difficult life in a city that was not her home but had become her habit. And now she was here. Wherever here was. And there were arrows. Her name was Moreo Abisola. She was 27 years old. She was from Lagos, Nigeria. She had long, straight black hair and steady hands and a heart that had been broken once and rebuilt in silence. She was not supposed to be here. She did not know the rules of this place or the language of these soldiers or the name of the man bleeding in her arms whose pulse she had been monitoring for the last 4 hours like it was the most important number in any world. But she knew one thing. She was not letting go. It had started, as the most life-altering things in Moreo's life always did, quietly, without fanfare, without warning. It had started with an old woman and a paintbrush. 12 years before that night in the forest, a little girl sat on a worn mat in a small room in Lagos, surrounded by paintings she had made herself. The walls were covered in them. Animals she had never seen in real life. Faces she invented. Skies and colors that did not exist. Her father sat beside her on the mat, his back against the wall, reading from a storybook with a cracked spine and pages soft from too much love. His voice was low and warm, the kind of voice that made you feel that the room had walls and the walls had held and nothing outside could reach you tonight. He was reading her the story of a prince who crossed rivers of fire to find the woman whose face lived in his dreams. 8-year-old Moreo pressed her knees to her chest and listened with her whole body. When her father closed the book, he looked at her, really looked, the way he always did, like she was something that deserved to be seen completely. One day, Moreo, he said, someone will cross worlds for you. She laughed. Completely. Without reservation. The way children laugh before the world teaches them to be careful with joy. She did not know it was the last year she would have him. She did not know that 12 years later she would be standing in a world that should not exist, holding a man she had never met, with an arrow still vibrating in the tree behind her head. She did not know any of it. She just laughed. Seoul was cold in November in a way that Lagos never prepared you for, the kind of cold that had an opinion about you. Moreo walked out of Seoul National General Hospital at 11:47 p.m. after a 14-hour shift, pulled her jacket tighter and told herself she was fine. She did this every night. The telling herself. It had become a ritual, the way prayer was a ritual, something you did not because it always worked, but because the doing of it kept you moving forward. She was fine. Her father had been gone for 3 years. She painted now only when the silence got too loud, which was often. She had moved to Seoul because the nursing program paid better, and the distance from Lagos meant she did not have to watch her mother's face every morning and see her own grief reflected back. She had survived Kwame. 3 years of loving a man who used her softness against her, who cheated and lied, and once, on a Tuesday in March, raised his hand. She had left. She had healed. Slowly, carefully, like setting a bone yourself in the dark. She was fine. She stopped at the convenience store on the way home. She was reaching for ramen when she heard the woman outside. She was old, ancient, almost in the way of things that have outlasted everything around them. Korean. Blind eyes that had gone pale and still. She was standing outside the store with 4 grocery bags cutting into her fingers and the kind of stillness that said she had been standing there long enough to stop expecting help. Moreo went outside without thinking. She always helped without thinking. It was the part of herself she had never managed to lose, no matter what Kwame had done to the rest of her. 할머니, 제가 도와드릴게요. 뭐래요, 세드? Grandmother, let me help you. The old woman turned her blind face toward Moreo. She smiled, slow like sunrise. 3 blocks. Uphill. In the drizzle. Moreo carried the bags and the woman walked beside her and did not say a word until they reached her door. Then she turned. 착한 마음을 가진 여인이군요. She said. You are a woman with a kind heart. 감사합니다. 모래 you said. Thank you. 그리고 상상의 마음도요. And an imaginary heart. Moreo did not know what that meant. Before she could ask, the old woman reached into her sleeve. She pressed something into Moreo's palm and closed her fingers around it. A paintbrush. Old dark wood. Bristles impossibly fine. Warm, not from the old woman's hand, but from somewhere else. Something else. 오늘 밤 그 다른 마음을 써요. 더 woman said. Tonight, use the other one. She closed her door. Moreo stood on the doorstep in the drizzle, holding a paintbrush from a blind woman who moved like she knew something about the future and had decided not to warn you. She told herself this was strange. She told herself she should go home and eat ramen and sleep. She went home. She did not sleep. The apartment was small and clean. Prints on the walls, her own paintings, framed cheaply. A canvas in the corner she had not touched in 3 weeks sitting under a dust cloth like a secret she was not ready to tell. She set the brush on the table. She made tea. She looked at the brush. She drank the tea. She looked at the brush again. She picked it up. She told herself she was just going to sketch. Something small. Something simple. The brush moved differently than her others. Not wrong, the opposite of wrong. Like it already knew what it was looking for and was simply asking her hands to follow. She did not choose what to paint. She understood this only afterward. The brush moved and she followed, and what appeared on the canvas was not anything she consciously decided on. Long dark hair. Some of it falling forward across cheekbones that could have been carved. Eyes that were not cold but controlled. The eyes of a man who had chosen stillness over breaking and kept choosing it every day. A jawline she had no frame of reference for. Blue royal hanbok. A cliff behind him. Wind in his hair and something in his face that looked like a man who had been waiting. Not impatiently, but with the full weight of someone who knew what they were waiting for. She painted her Prince Charming. The one from her father's story. The one she had buried under 3 years of night shifts and careful silence. She painted until her eyes closed. The brush glowed once. Softly. Like a lamp being covered. She woke up cold. Rain on her face. Stone beneath her. She was still in her nurse scrubs. She sat up. Around her, a forest that had never seen electricity. Trees wider than cars. Air so clean it felt like breathing something that had never been used before. A waterfall falling silver into black water ahead of her, loud enough to feel in her chest. Mountains behind it in the dark, enormous and indifferent. No soul. No apartment. No canvas. She looked at her hands. They were empty. She looked at the waterfall. And then she saw him. Lying at the water's edge. Blue royal hanbok. Blood, dark and spreading. Across his abdomen, soaked through the fabric and into the wet grass beneath him. A sword loose in his right hand. Long dark hair spread around him in the wet. His face slack. Unconscious. The most beautiful face she had ever seen in her life. The face she had just painted. Moreo did not scream. She did not stand there processing. She moved, 3 years of emergency nursing moving her body before her mind had finished being shocked. She dropped to both knees beside him. Her fingers found his pulse point. She pressed. Waited. A thread. Barely. But there. Okay, she said aloud, to no one, to herself, to this impossible world. Okay. She worked fast. She tore strips from the lower hem of her scrubs with practiced hands. She built a small fire, her hands shaking, her grandmother's voice in her head. Every forest has medicine if you know where to look, and she heated the flat of the sword blade until it glowed and used it to cauterize the worst of the bleeding. He did not wake. She packed the wound with herbs she identified by touch and memory. She applied pressure. She bound. She held. She did not let herself think about where she was or how she had gotten here. She thought only about the thread of pulse under her fingers and keeping it there. The rain fell. The forest dripped. The waterfall roared. She held. Then she heard the voices. Men, moving through the trees to her left, the sound of them organized and purposeful. She caught fragments in Korean over the waterfall's noise. 주군께서 시신을 가져오라 하셨다. The Lord has ordered us to bring the body. 폭포 근처를 확인해라. Check near the waterfall. 최린 대감의 명이다. It is Lord Choirin's command. Torchlight flickering between the trees. Getting closer. Maria looked at the man on the ground. She looked at the treeline. She looked back at him. She grabbed him under both arms and pulled. He was not a small man. He was tall and solid and wearing wet royal clothing that added weight she did not have time to calculate. She dug her heels into the mud and she pulled him, inch by inch, then foot by foot, toward a cave she had spotted in the rock face when she first woke up. Her arms burned. Her back screamed. She did not stop. She covered the blood trail with dirt and dead leaves with one hand while dragging him with the other. She got inside the cave 20 seconds before the torches swept the bank where he had been lying. She sat against the cave wall, breathing hard, his head near her knee. His pulse, she checked, still there. Steadier, maybe. She thought steadier. She looked at his face in the dark. The face she had painted. 누구세요? She whispered. Who are you? He did not answer. She stayed awake all night, 2 fingers on his pulse point, listening to the soldiers move through the forest outside. If this story already has you gripping your seat, wait until you see what happens next. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single second of this. Morning came gray and cold and thin through the cave mouth. And Guman opened his eyes. He stared at the cave ceiling. Then he turned his head, slowly, with the careful economy of someone whose body had informed them that unnecessary movement had a price, and he found Maria watching him from 2 feet away with the focused expression of a woman who had been running vital sign calculations in her head all night. He said something in Korean first. She caught fragments 어디어떻게. Where? How? She answered carefully in the Korean she had been building for 3 years. 다치셨어요. 움직이지 마세요. You're injured. Don't move. He blinked. He looked at her, really looked, the same way her father used to look at things, like looking was a serious and complete act. Then he switched to English, precise, accented, like someone who had learned it from texts and not from people. Thank you. 2 words. But in his voice they carried the weight of a full sentence. She told him she didn't know how she had gotten here. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she would have looked away from anyone else. Then he told her quietly, there were places where the walls between imagination and reality thinned to nothing, especially for people with imaginary hearts. The old woman had been waiting for someone like Moreo for a very long time. The brush was never just a brush. Moreo opened her mouth to ask what that meant, what any of it meant, when she heard movement outside. Close. Too close. 3 soldiers, scanning the tree line. One found the herbs she had dropped the night before. Then they saw her, standing at the cave entrance, the blood on her hands that was not her blood, and the tallest one raised his sword. 거기 서라. 가짜 왕자는 어디 있느냐? Stop there. Where is the false prince? She heard Guman move behind her. 1 stride. That was all he took. 1 stride out of the cave with nothing but a wounded body and a sword he should not have been able to lift, and all 3 soldiers went down. He did not look like he was trying hard. He looked like he was trying conserved, like someone spending the last of something precious and knowing exactly what it was worth. Then he collapsed in the snow. Maria was at his side before he hit the ground fully. 어떻게 걸을 수가 있어요? How are you even walking? He looked up at her from the snow. His jaw was set. His eyes were steady and dark and completely calm in the way of people who have accepted worse than this. 가요, he said. Run. Then in English, they want me. Not you. She looked at him. She looked at the trees, the signal flares the soldiers had sent up before they fell, already burning orange above the forest canopy. The sound of more men coming, organized and fast. She looked back at Guman. She kneeled in the snow. She put her hand in his. The archers came through the trees. Arrows were knocked. She counted 12, then stopped counting because the number didn't matter anymore. She held tighter. The arrows released. And the world went gold at the edges. And both of them vanished. Her couch. Her ceiling. Her apartment in Seoul at 4:30 in the morning. Moreo sat on the floor beside her couch for 3 full minutes before she moved. She needed the 3 minutes. She needed to feel the floor, solid, familiar, the specific scratch of her cheap rug against her knees, and let her body remember what normal felt like. Then she got up. She went to her medical kit in the bathroom cabinet. She came back. She sat in 4-line in Guman's arm with hands that barely shook and stitched his wound properly with the focus she gave every patient who had ever needed her to be steady when they could not be. She was good at being steady for other people. She changed out of her ruined scrubs. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom and looked at him, unconscious on her couch, her ex-boyfriend Kwame's white shirt too short in the arms on him, jogger pants that almost fit. His long dark hair spread across her pillow. His face slack and breathing and absurdly, unfairly beautiful. She had never planned to have anyone in this apartment. After Kwame, she had furnished it specifically for one person. One set of everything. One chair at the table. One pillow. The kind of apartment that said, gently, firmly, I am done making space for people who don't stay. She pulled up a chair. She sat across from him and watched him breathe. At some point, she turned to the painting. And she went cold. She had painted a man on a cliff. Alone. Blue hanbok. Dark hair. Nothing else. The painting now showed arrows in the air. A woman in nurse scrubs, her own face, her own hair, her own hands, holding a man in blue hanbok. Bodies of soldiers around them. The waterfall in the background. A forest she had never painted. She had not painted any of this. The brush was on the table. The bristles were warm. She did not touch it. She sat back in her chair, looked at the ceiling, and said, quietly, to the empty apartment, "What is happening to me?" Not a question. An acknowledgement. Then she went to sleep in the chair with her fingers 2 inches from his pulse point, just in case. Morning found her with a crick in her neck and the couch empty. She found him 3 streets away, standing in the middle of active traffic on a Thursday morning, staring at a city bus with the focused intensity of a man who was genuinely uncertain whether it was alive. Cars were honking. A taxi driver was leaning out of his window. Gumin was not moving. He was studying the bus like a general studying a battlefield formation he had never encountered before. Moreo put her hand on his arm and walked him out of the road. "Kamsahamnida," he said automatically. "Thank you." His gaze was still on the bus. "It's not going to attack you," she said. He looked at her. "How do you know?" She took a breath. "Okay. There is a lot I need to explain." What followed was the week that would later feel, to both of them, like the truest version of their lives. Moreo showed him traffic lights, and he stood at the first one for an entire cycle, watching the colors change. Before he was satisfied, he understood the logic. She took him to the supermarket and lost him for 11 minutes in the ramen aisle. She found him crouched in front of the bottom shelf, reading flavor names by sounding out the Korean characters with the concentration of a scholar encountering a sacred text. She stood behind him and did not rush him. He tried moi moi for the first time on the 4th day. She made it without telling him what it was, just set the plate in front of him and sat across the table. He took one bite. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he looked at her across the table with an expression she would think about for the rest of her life. Completely open, completely present, like someone who had stopped performing responses and was simply receiving the thing as it was. "Ige moeo," he said softly. "What is this?" "Momo. It's Nigerian. My grandmother's recipe." He looked at the plate. He looked at her. "I want to eat this every day." "Absolutely not. Every day, Moreo." I said no, Gumin. He looked at her with his eyes only, not changing his face, not pushing, just looking, and she held out for 4 more seconds before she looked away. She made it 3 more times that week. She told herself it was because she had the ingredients already. On the 5th night, she put on a romantic Korean drama because she ran out of things to explain and thought watching television would be simpler. Within 7 minutes, Gumin was fully upright on the couch, watching with total absorption. He did not speak for 40 minutes. When the male lead finally confessed to the female lead in episode 3, Gumin turned to Moreo with an expression of genuine cultural shock. "In my kingdom," he said carefully, "no one speaks to each other like this." "Like what?" He thought about it. "Honestly. Without armor." Moreo looked at the screen. Then she looked at the blanket on her knees. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think that's just your kingdom." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, when did you stop?" She looked at him. "Stop what?" "Speaking without armor." The question sat in the room between them like something that had been waiting for someone to name it. Moreo looked at the television. She did not answer for long enough that any other person would have moved on. Gumin did not move on. He waited. "There was someone," she said finally. "He made me feel like honesty was a door I kept opening that he kept using to walk out through. So I stopped opening it." "He was a coward," Gumin said. "Not with anger. just with the flat certainty of someone stating a fact about the physical world. Yeah, Moreo said. He was. Your father was not. She turned to look at him sharply. She had told him about her father in pieces across the week, small things here and there. She had not realized he had been holding the pieces together. No, she said. He wasn't. Tell me about him. So she did. She told him about Lagos and the mat and the storybook with the cracked spine. She told him about the paintings on the walls and how her father could tell what mood she was in by which colors she used that day. She told him about the hospital call, the drive, the room that still smelled like him when she arrived but held a body that no longer did. She told him about choosing nursing because the bills did not stop when the grief started and painting did not pay them. Gyu-min listened the way that was rarer than any magic she had encountered in two worlds. He did not offer comfort or solutions. He simply took in everything she said and held it with the care of someone who understood that some things you do not fix. You just refuse to let them be held alone. Then he told her about his father. He told her about the banquet. About Chai-rin, beautiful, precise Chai-rin, appearing at court like she belonged there, integrated so smoothly that by the time anyone thought to question her, she had become indispensable. He told her about the night the sleeping potion moved through the soldiers' drinks, and the palace fell quiet at the wrong hour, and his father drank the poisoned cup that Chai-rin had placed with her own hands. He told her about the cliff. About the drug already moving through his blood when he tried to fight, every movement 3 seconds late, every instinct arriving after the moment had passed. About Lord Choi-rin's face, close to his, completely without feeling, as the blade went in. About the falling. About cold water and darkness and then warmth. 2 fingers on his pulse. Hands that did not shake. You were the first thing I felt, he said. When I came back. Just your hands. Moreo looked at the television. A commercial was playing. Neither of them was watching it. You were dying in a world I had never seen, she said. I didn't know what else to do. You did everything. The apartment was very quiet. They fell asleep on opposite ends of the couch at 3 in the morning. The drama still playing. The blanket pulled between them like a shared border neither of them had formally agreed to cross yet. The ambush happened on a Wednesday night. They were walking home from the cinema. Gyu-min had chosen the film, obviously a romance, the third one he had picked in 2 weeks, and Moreo was mid-sentence about a plot hole in the final act when the shadows moved. Lord Choi-rin stepped into the streetlight. He was in a modern suit, dark, expensive, perfectly fitted in the way that said someone had done the fitting and he had stood still and expected it. His long hair was pulled back. He stood with the ease of someone for whom presence was not an effort but a consequence. Behind him, his men materialized from the dark in 1s and 2s until they formed a complete circle with Gyu-min and Moreo at its center. And beside him, Chai-rin. Red dress. Hair down. She looked like she had been beautiful for so long it had stopped being interesting to her. Her eyes went straight to Gyu-min the moment she stepped into the light, and they stayed there, not with hunger, not with cruelty, but with something more complicated than both. Something that looked like a debt she had been carrying for a very long time. Gyu-min stepped in front of Moreo. He did it without looking at her. 1 step back, 1 arm extending, pressing her behind him. The movement of someone for whom protection is not a decision but a direction. Lord Choi-rin watched this. His mouth curved. Not a smile, an observation. 형제. Brother. His voice was smooth and unhurried. 이거 참 시적이지 않나? Isn't this poetic? His gaze moved past Gyu-min to Moreo, 1 slow, complete look, like an appraiser. Then back. 왕국을 잃고 간호사를 찾았구나. You lose a kingdom, and you find a nurse. He laughed. Ha, ha, ha. Each one deliberate. Each one landing with the precision of something practiced until it looked effortless. Gyu-min said nothing. He stood in front of Moreo and said nothing, and the stillness of him was louder than anything Lord Choi-rin was doing. 할 말이 있으면 해라, 최린. Say what you came to say, Choi-rin. In English, for Moreo's benefit. Not translation, inclusion. Gyu-min making sure she was in the same room as the conversation, even now. Lord Choi-rin straightened his cuffs. He was not in a hurry. He had never been in a hurry. Hurry was for people who were not certain of the outcome. 72시간이다. 72 hours. 왕국으로 돌아와라. 왕좌 앞에 서라. 내 앞에 무릎 꿇고 내 권리를 포기해라. Return to the kingdom. Stand before the throne. Kneel before me and renounce your claim. He looked at Moreo then, directly for the first time. If you love your precious mortal woman as much as this moment suggests, you will do it. And she lives a long, quiet life never knowing what almost happened to her. He turned, walked back into the dark. Chai Rin lingered. One extra second. Her eyes on Gyu Min, the debt in them unpaid and heavy. Then she followed. The circle of men dissolved back into shadow. The street was empty. The rain picked up. Moreo and Gyu Min stood in the wet street, and the silence between them was the kind that had too much inside it to speak. The hospital call came 2 days later. Urgent patient. Private room. Moreo arrived in her scrubs and found the room occupied by one person sitting in a chair with the posture of someone who has decided to take up exactly as much space as they deserve and no more. Chai Rin. No injury. No chart. Just the red dress from 2 nights ago, traded for something simpler, and eyes that had been awake too long. Moreo turned to leave. 당신은 그를 사랑해요? Do you love him? She stopped. Chai Rin's hands were in her lap. She was looking at them. 사랑하는 사람을 다치게 하는 것이 얼마나 힘든지 알아요? Do you know how hard it is to hurt someone you love? She looked up. 나는 나쁜 사람이 아니에요. I am not a bad person. Her voice was even, not defensive, exhausted with the effort of saying a true thing that no one would believe. 그냥 최린의 명을 따를 뿐이에요. 왜냐면 그가 내 여동생을 잡고 있거든요. 수아, 그녀가 내 전부예요. I just follow Lord Choi Rin's orders. Because he has my little sister. Suah. She is all I have. She has been all I have since I was 19 years old. She continued in English, because she wanted Moreo to hear this without the filter of translation. I was sent to the palace to get close. To find weaknesses. To report. I did it because Suah was the price of refusal. And then. She stopped. The room was very quiet. And then I fell in love with a man I was sent to destroy. And I still had to destroy him anyway. Because of my sister. Moreo was quiet for a long time. She stood at the door with her hand not quite on the handle. Gyu Min told me everything, she said. The sleeping potion. The soldiers. His father. Yes. You expect me to believe you had no choice. No. Chai Rin met her eyes fully. I expect you to understand that some cages don't have visible bars. Moreo was quiet again. Then she turned to the door. Chai Rin's voice changed, harder. The grief pulling back and something raw surfacing. You think you understand everything. You don't. The throne of the 7 is at stake and Gyu Min is mine. Mine. I will not share him. When Lord Choi Rin ascends, I will have him take you as a bride for his heir, or worse. So decide. Moreo's hand found the door handle. She opened it. And just before she stepped through, quietly, without turning around. Her name is Suah, she said. I heard you. She let the door close. Behind it in the room, Chai Rin sat very still. Her eyes went to the closed door and stayed there. Something shifted in her face, old and locked, like a wall in a room where someone had just opened a window for the first time in years. The rooftop had become Moreo's place in the same quiet way that all honest places are claimed, not by decision but by returning to them until they know you. She went there when the apartment felt too small for what was inside her. She sat on the ledge, not dangerously, just honestly, the way you sit somewhere when you are too tired to perform safety, and let the city breathe below her. Seoul at night from 7 floors up was its own kind of painting. She had never put it on canvas because some things you do not capture. You just go back to them. She heard the door behind her and did not turn around. Gyu Min sat beside her on the ledge. He did not ask if she was okay. He did not fill the silence with anything. He sat with it the way he had learned to sit with her, completely, without condition, like her company was the destination and not the beginning of somewhere else. They sat there for a long time. Below them Seoul moved and glittered and did not know or care that the deadline was tomorrow. 내일 돌아가야 해요, he said. I have to go back tomorrow. 알아요, she said. I know. If I kneel to him, the 7 kingdoms fall to someone who sees people as tools. Every general who served my father. Every family in those kingdoms who never had a voice. Gone. Replaced by his version of order, which is just control with a better name. I know. He turned to her. Just her name. 뭐라요? Just that. In his mouth, her name had never sounded like a name. It sounded like an answer to a question he had been asking for a long time without knowing the question. It sounded like a rival. She looked at him. He raised both hands, careful, slow, giving her every opportunity to move away, and held her face. She felt his thumbs at her temples. She felt the full weight of him paying attention to her in the specific way that was his alone, the way that had no performance in it. He kissed her in the rain. She did not pull back. She kissed him back with 3 years of rebuilding and 4 weeks of Gumin, and the full weight of her imaginary heart finally being used for the thing it was made for. She kissed him back like her father's story. Rivers of fire, worlds crossed, the thing worth the cost of the thing. When they broke apart, the rain was on both their faces, and the tears were there too, and you could not tell where one ended and the other began. 내 세계에서는 he said quietly, in my world, 왕은 왕좌를 지키기 전에 사랑을 허락받지 못해요. A king is not permitted to love before he secures his throne. And in my world, she said, voice steady and wet, a woman who has been hurt before is not supposed to feel like this after only a few weeks. Silence between them. The rain. So we are both breaking rules, he said. She laughed through the tears. Completely. Without reservation. Like she laughed as a child before the world taught her to be careful with joy. Both of us, she said. The shadows moved at the rooftop's edge. Lord Choi Rin's men stepped out of the dark. 6 of them, silent, already positioned. They must have been there for several minutes. Waiting. The portal opened behind them, a tear in the air, golden-edged and ancient, like a wound in the sky that had been waiting to be reopened. The light of it fell across the wet rooftop. Gumin stood. She watched it happen, the settling. The moment the king came back into his spine. He straightened and his face changed, and he was not just the man who ate moi moi and watched romantic dramas and fell asleep on her couch at 3 a.m. with the blanket between them. He was something older than that. Something that had been born knowing the weight of a crown, even when there was no crown on his head. He looked at her. She memorized his face. She did it deliberately. Every line, every shadow, the specific way his hair fell across his left cheekbone. She stored it in the part of herself where she kept things she could not afford to lose. He stepped through the portal. The gold closed behind him. The rooftop was just a rooftop again. Moreo stood in the rain for 1 full second. Then she kneeled on the wet surface and she screamed, into the rain, into the dark, into the city that did not stop moving for any of it. Not from weakness. From love that had nowhere to go. From a heart that had finally, completely opened, and was now standing in the rain with the door wide and the room empty. She screamed until the sound was gone. Then she sat in the wet and the quiet for a long time. Then she went inside. The days after were the kind that move but do not go anywhere. She went to work. She changed dressings and checked vitals and spoke to patients in careful Korean and wrote notes in the margins of charts that her supervisor said were too detailed, too thorough, too much. She went home. She ate standing at the counter. She did not paint. The canvas sat in the corner with the dust cloth on it. The brush was on the table where she had left it the night she came back from the other world. She walked past it every morning and every night without touching it. She told herself she was fine. She was not fine. She was not broken either. She knew the difference now, had learned it the hard way, could feel the difference between loss and collapse. This was loss. Loss was survivable. She had survived it before. But surviving was not living, and she had tasted living recently, and the difference was unmistakable. Wednesday. She walked out of the hospital at the end of her shift, and the old woman was there. Same stillness. Same blind eyes. Standing outside the hospital entrance with her hands folded and her face aimed in a direction that had nothing to do with sight. Moreo stopped in front of her. 할머니, she said. Grandmother. 울지 마라, 아가야. 더 올드 우먼 세드. Don't cry, child. 우는 건 아무것도 해결하지 못해. Crying doesn't solve anything. 그럼 뭐가 해결해요? Then what does? The old woman turned her blind face toward Moreo with the expression of someone who has been waiting for that exact question for a very long time. 내가 원하는 걸 스스로에게 물어봐라. Ask yourself what you want. Moreo looked at her. I want love. I want peace. The old woman smiled. 좋은 건 쉽게 얻어지지 않아. Nothing good comes easy. She reached out. She touched Moreo's face once. Light as breath, warm as that first night. 싸워야 해, 아가. You have to fight for it, child. She dropped her hand. 그 붓은 문만 여는 게 아니야. The brush does not just open doors. 결말을 써. It writes endings. She paused. 하지만 화가가 이야기의 일부가 될 준비가 됐을 때만. But only when the painter is ready to be part of the story. She walked away. Maria watched her go until she turned a corner and was no longer visible. Then she went home. The apartment at night. One lamp on. The specific silence of a place that has held something precious and now holds its absence instead. Maria stood in the middle of the room. On the table, the brush. Warm even from 3 feet away. She could feel it. Or she thought she could. She no longer entirely trusted the boundary between what was real and what she believed. On the floor beside the couch, Gyumin's sword. He had left it the night the portal took him. It had landed against the leg of the couch, and she had not moved it. She had walked around it every day for a week. She had not let herself pick it up because picking it up would make his absence into an object she held, and she had not been ready. She was ready now. She crossed the room and picked up the sword. It was heavier than she expected. Cold through her palms, the hilt worn smooth in specific places, where his hand had gripped it, where his thumb had rested. She turned it once. She felt the weight of it. She thought about him holding this in a field he had already lost, drugged, bleeding, still fighting because the alternative was something he could not be. She set it on the table beside the brush. She looked at both of them for a moment. Then she sat at the canvas and pulled the dust cloth off. She picked up the brush. And she painted Gyumin on a cliff. Not a dying man by a waterfall. Not the man asleep on her couch. The king. She painted him the way he was in that moment on the rooftop before the portal opened, spine straight, face changed, the thing that was older than circumstance sitting in every line of him. She painted the blue hanbok and the crown that should have been on his head and the cliff and the wind and all 7 kingdoms spread below him like they were waiting. She painted it with every hour she had known him sitting in her hands. She painted it with the week of Moi and traffic lights and him learning what honesty without armor sounded like. She painted it with the rooftop and the rain and the way her name sounded in his mouth like a rival. She painted until the brush felt different in her hand, not directing anymore, but channeling, like a wire carrying something from somewhere else, and she felt the painting become less a painting and more a door, and she understood suddenly what the old woman meant and what the brush was, and she looked at the sword on the table beside her. She picked up the sword. She held it in one hand and the brush in the other. She looked at the canvas. She looked at the painting of Gyumin on a cliff in a kingdom she had visited twice and loved more than she expected to love anything ever again after Kwame showed her what love could cost. She thought about her father. Someone will cross worlds for you. She looked at the sword. She thought about herself kneeling on a wet rooftop screaming into rain that didn't stop. She looked at the brush. She thought about the old woman's hands on her face. You have to fight for it. She stood up. She was still in her nurse scrubs. She had come home in them. She hadn't changed. She looked down at herself. Scrubs. The same ones she had been wearing the night the brush first pulled her through. She had washed them 3 times since then. They still looked exactly like what she was. A nurse from Lagos. No title. No army. No royal blood and no claim to anything in any kingdom. She raised the sword. She looked at the painting. In the other world. The throne room of the 7 kingdoms. Full. Every general, every noble, every soldier that Lord Choi-rin had assembled to witness the formal end of Gyumin's claim. Stone walls. Torchlight. The specific silence of a room that has decided how it will end and is simply waiting for the body to catch up to the decision. Gyumin kneeling. Not from defeat. From strategy. Buying seconds with the only currency he had left. The appearance of surrender. Lord Choi-rin standing before him with his sword raised and his face open with victory in the specific way of someone who has been waiting for this moment for so long that arriving at it feels less like winning and more like finally exhaling. 가짜 왕의 끝이 왔도다. Here comes the end of your false king. He raised the sword higher. And Gyumin felt something. In his right hand. His sword. Arriving from nothing. From nowhere. From across 2 worlds and a painting and a woman in nurse scrubs with paint-stained hands who had decided that love was not something you waited for. He closed his fingers around the hilt. The throne room erupted. Lord Choi-rin's face changed. For the first time in the entire story, something moved across it that was not composure. He took 1 step back. Just 1. But it was everything. Choi-rin watched from the edge of the room. Her eyes moved from Gyumin's sword to the air where it had come from to something she was calculating in the privacy of her own face. The battle began. It was not elegant. It was real. The specific reality of a man fighting at less than full capacity against an army that had been built for exactly this moment. Gyumin moved through the throne room like water that had learned to cut, efficient, conserved, every motion earning exactly what he needed and spending nothing extra. But the wound was 3 weeks old and imperfectly healed, and Lord Choi-rin had men on every side, and the numbers did not add up no matter how Gyumin ran them. Lord Choi-rin watched from the center of the room. He was not fighting himself. Why would he? He had built the army, so he would not have to. One of his soldiers circled behind Gyumin, bow drawn, aimed at the exposed space between his shoulder blades where the hanbok had torn in the fight. Choi-rin saw it. She had been standing at the edge of the room since the fight began, her face doing the calculation that had been running in her since the night she sat in a hospital room, and a woman said her name is Suwa. I heard you, and walked out without asking for anything in return. She stepped forward. She stepped in front of the soldier's arrow. The sound of it was very small for something that changed everything. She went down. The room shifted. The older generals, the ones who had served Gyumin's father for decades and had been standing in Lord Choi-rin's ranks with the specific stillness of men obeying orders they had never agreed to, broke. One moved first, then two. Then the line dissolved and the throne room became something other than a staged execution. Lord Choi-rin's composure did not break. His face went very still instead, which was worse. He was looking for Gyumin across the room. Gyumin was looking back. Then the air tore open. She walked through the air like she stepped through a door that had always been there. One moment the throne room had its particular shape. Torchlight, stone. The specific geography of a space that had just shifted from execution to something unresolved. The next moment a door existed in the middle of it that had not existed before, gold-edged and ancient, and Maria Bisola stepped through it in nurse scrubs with a paintbrush in one hand and paint still drying on her fingers from holding the sword before she threw it through the canvas. She had no armor. No weapon now. No title, no army, no royal blood, and no claim to anything in any room in any world. She stood in the center of the throne room of the 7 kingdoms, and the entire room looked at her. Lord Choi-rin looked at her. His head tilted slightly to one side, the gesture of a man encountering a variable he had not accounted for and was deciding, in real time, how much to care. Maria walked to the center of the room. She stopped. She stood between Gyumin and Lord Choi-rin. The room was so quiet you could hear the torches. She looked at Lord Choi-rin directly. Not with defiance. Defiance was for people who needed the other person to see them as a threat. She looked at him with something simpler and more complete. The way she looked at every situation that required her to be steady when no one else could be. 나는 아무것도 아닌 사람이에요. She said, I am nobody. In Korean, so the room could hear it. Her accent was heavy, but the words were clear. 라고스에서 온 간호사. 살아남으려고 서울에 온. A nurse from Lagos, who came to Seoul to survive. She switched to English because English was where her precision lived. I have no title, no army, no royal blood, no claim to anything in this room. She looked at Lord Choi-rin without looking away. But I knelt in the snow of a world I had never seen, and I stitched your brother's wound with strips of my own clothes. I built a fire with my hands and cauterized his wound with his own blade. I dragged him through a forest in the dark and hid him in a cave while your soldiers swept the riverbank 3 feet away. I kept his heart beating through the night with 2 fingers and a prayer. She paused. The torches crackled. And I will not stand in 2 worlds and watch you take something that was never yours. Lord Choi-rin's mouth curved, the composure reasserting itself, the amusement returning like a reflex. 내가 서지 않을 거라고 you will not stand. I am already standing. The silence after that sentence was absolute. It filled the stone room completely, edge to edge, the way silence only fills a space when something true has been spoken into it. Lord Choi-rin looked away from her. It was 1 second. One fraction of his attention breaking towards something else in the room. A movement, a sound from the generals, the recalculation happening in his expression. 1 second. Gyumin moved. He drove the sword through. Lord Choi-rin looked down. Then he looked up at Gyumin with an expression that was not pain and not anger and not anything that had a name. Just the specific face of someone arriving, far too late, at the truth of something they chose not to see when choosing could have mattered. He fell. The rain outside turned to snow. It came through the high windows of the throne room in soft curtains of white, settling on the stone floor, dissolving in the torchlight. The kind of snow that falls in endings. Gyumin turned. Maria was already running. He caught her with both arms. Complete, absolute, The embrace of someone who has been counting the seconds of separation and stopped counting now because the counting is over. He held her with the specific tightness of a person who has just survived something and needs to feel the weight of what they survived for. She held him back just as hard. 당신을 잃었다고 생각했어요. He said into her hair. I thought I had lost you. 거의 잃을 뻔했죠. She said. You almost did. She pulled back enough to look at his face. Her hands went to his jaw, the way his had gone to her face on the rooftop, and she held it. 다시는 그러지 마요. Don't do that again. 다시는요. He said. Never. His hands covered hers. 절대로. Ever. The generals moved first. The oldest one, white-haired. The kind of man whose posture alone told you he had served kings long enough to know what one looked like, crossed the throne room floor with his sword held flat across both open palms. He stopped in front of Gyumin. He lowered himself to one knee. He set the sword on the ground in front of him. Then the one beside him. Then the next. Then the ones who had broken from Lord Choirin's line during the fight, the ones who had been waiting, all of them, for exactly this permission. One by one. Soldier by soldier. General by general. Noble by noble. The throne room went to its knees. The sound of it. Fabric on stone. Metal set down. A room full of people making a choice. Accumulated into something that was not noise but weather. Moreo stood in the middle of it. In nurse scrubs with paint on her fingers and a paintbrush in her hand, in the throne room of the Seven Kingdoms, in a world that should not have been accessible to a girl from Lagos who learned to heal people because the bills didn't stop when grief started. She looked at all of it. She thought about her father. The mat. The book with the cracked spine. The way he had read to her like reading was a serious and sacred act. Someone will cross worlds for you. She had crossed them first. The cheer began at the edges of the room. Quietly, not quite organized, the sound of something that had been held for a long time and was now releasing. It built. It pushed through the walls and out into the ancient city beyond, into streets and squares, and the Seven Kingdoms spread below the palace on the cliff, and it became 만세, 진정한 왕이여, 올힐 더 트루킹. 만세 음은왕이여, all hail King Gyumin. And underneath it, beginning small at the back of the room and spreading forward with the inevitability of something that had always been true. Mansabia, all hail the queen. At the edge of the room, a door opened. It was not a dramatic opening. It was quiet, a side door, the kind of door rooms like this have that no one uses because the main doors make better statements. A soldier held it. And through it came a young woman, young, frightened, her eyes moving through the room in the specific way of someone who has been kept somewhere enclosed for so long that open spaces require adjustment. Sua. Chairin was on the floor still, a general's jacket pressed to her wound, alive. One of the defected soldiers had gone to her when the fighting stopped. She was sitting up against the wall with the careful stillness of someone who was alive through decision more than comfort. She looked across the room. She saw her sister. The sound that came out of Chairin was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the sound of something that had been locked for years in a place with no windows opening all at once into light. She said her sister's name once, Fua, and Sua heard it across the whole throne room and ran. They held each other on the floor of the throne room of the Seven Kingdoms, while the world reorganized itself around them. Moreo watched from across the room. Gyumin stood beside her. He followed her gaze. He saw Chairin and Sua, and he was quiet for a moment. The quiet of someone processing the full shape of a thing they could not see all sides of before now. 당신이 그렇게 한 거예요. He said. You did that? 그녀의 이름을 들었어요. 뭐래요? said simply. I heard her name. 그게 다예요. That's all. He looked at her. The look that was his, complete, reading what was underneath, holding what he found with care. 뭐라요? He said. Just her name. Still. After everything. Still the whole conversation. Across the room, Chairin, holding her sister, looked up. She found Moreo's eyes across the width of the throne room. She could not speak. The distance was too far and her voice was occupied with other things. But she bowed her head. Once. Deep. The bow of someone who has no currency left to offer except the acknowledgement of a debt that cannot be repaid. Moreo nodded back. Simple. Clean. The closing of something without the need for more words than that. Months later. The cliff above the ancient kingdom in the morning. The kind of morning that belongs to people who have survived something and come out the other side into a day that is genuinely new. Moreo stood at the cliff edge. Below her, 7 kingdoms spread in the early light like something she once imagined, because she had, because all of this had lived in her head before it lived in the world. The air was cold and clear. The kind of air that felt like breathing something that had never been used before, like that first night at the waterfall, except now the world was not terrifying. It was hers. She was wearing royal hanbok, deep green, embroidered in gold. Her long straight hair was caught by the wind coming up from the valley. Her belly was round and full new life, growing in a woman who had rebuilt herself in silence after Kwame and crossed 2 worlds in nurse scrubs and stood in a throne room with nothing but a paintbrush and a true thing to say. She put her hand on her belly and looked at the horizon. She heard the door behind her. Guman's footsteps. She knew them now, had mapped them onto her nervous system the way you map the sounds of someone you have decided to keep. He stepped up behind her, his arms wrapped around her from beneath, warm, complete, the specific way he held her that was different from how he held anything else. He rested his chin on her shoulder and looked out at the same horizon. They were quiet together. Below, the city was waking. Smoke from morning fires. The sound of the kingdom beginning its day. 뭐 생각하고 있어요? He said. What are you thinking? She looked at the horizon. 아버지가 했던 말이 생각나요. She said. I'm thinking about something my father said. She felt his arms tighten slightly. He always did when she mentioned her father, like he understood what it cost and wanted to hold some of the weight. 언젠가 누군가 나를 위해 세상을 건널 거라고 했어요. He said that one day someone would cross worlds for me. Guman was quiet. 그 말이 맞았어, he said quietly. He was right. She smiled. She turned her head to look at him, his face close to hers, his hair falling forward slightly the way it always did, his eyes on her with the full force of everything he was. 맞았죠, she said. He was. She held his gaze. 하지만 내가 먼저 건넜어요. But I crossed them first. He laughed. Really laughed. The full kind, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there, the kind she had been collecting since the day she taught him what a traffic light was for. He turned her to face him fully, both hands on her face, thumbs at her temples, the gesture that had been his since the rooftop in the rain. He looked at her. She looked at him. Below, someone began to cheer. A single voice clear in the morning air. Then another. Then 10. Then it moved through the streets like a tide, kingdom by kingdom, until the whole ancient world was alive with it, rising up the cliff face in waves, filling the morning air, washing over both of them on the cliff top like something warm. Mansa all hail King Mansa, all hail the Queen Mansa, all hail Mansa, all hail. Guman kissed her. She kissed him back completely, without reservation, the way she laughed as a child before the world taught her to protect her joy. The way you give yourself to something when you have stopped being afraid of what it costs. The cheering continued below. The sun came up fully over the 7 kingdoms. Final image. Moreo's apartment wall. Seoul. The painting, still there where she left it. Unchanged. It has not updated, has not shifted, has not added arrows or armies or throne rooms. It shows only what it showed the night she first painted it. A man on a cliff. A woman beside him. Both in royal hanbok. Both looking at the horizon. The sun hitting both of them. It was always going to end this way. She just had to be brave enough to paint it. She just had to be ready to become part of the story. Like this video right now. Every like tells us you want more stories like this one. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we are not done. There are more worlds to cross, more love to fight for, more stories that will keep you up until 2 in the morning refusing to press pause. Drop a comment below. Tell us, what was the moment that broke you? Was it the kiss in the rain? Was it Maria walking through the portal in nurse scrubs? Was it the painting on the wall at the end that was always right? Tell us. We read every single one. 2 worlds apart. Where the brush met the blade. Where the nurse became the queen. Where love was never a rescue. It was a revolution. We will see you in the next one.